This week's parasha, in Parashat TAVO, we begin with the Bicurim, but there's a famous question brought down in the Sfarim as to why is it this parasha have semichut to the previous message of Mechiat Amalek, where we read at the end of Ki Tetzeh, Zachor et asher aseh lecha Amalek b'derech b'tzetchem miMitzrayim, asher karecha b'derech v'yizaneb lecha kol hanecha sharim acharecha v'ata ayev v'yagaya. And what's interesting is that when we bring the Bicurim first are from only the 7 Shiv'at Minim of Eretz Yisrael. They are Chita, Seorah, Gefen, Te'ena, Rimon, Zet Shemen, Zet, Udvash, and Dvash. Rashi tells us it's Tmarim, not of the honey, but rather of the dates. And there's a famous question, why are they both connected? And when we bring the Bicurim, what's interesting is if you take a look, it says in Masechet Bicurim Gimel Aleph, כיצד מפרישים הביקורים? יורד אדם בתוך שדה ורואה תאנה שביקרה, אשכול שביקר, רימון שביקר, כושרו בגמל ואומר הרי אלו ביקורים. So what would happen is when you would have any of these produce that would grown, whether it's crop or the fruits, the first time the flower would bud and the fruit would come out, or the crop, you would tie a little string, maybe a red string on it, and it would be identified. So later on, you would put them in the tene, which Unkelus Targum tells us is a sal, like a basket, and you would put it on your shoulder, and then you would end up bringing it to the Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash. But what's interesting is when you get to the Kohen, what you have to say. You say, and you start, Arami Oved Avi Vayel Misrama Vayakor Sham Binte Me'at. And interesting, what does this have to do with the Bicurim? And who's this Arami? So we know the Arami is Lavan HaArami. Arami is Otiyot Ramai. And Lavan came from Aram Naharaim. It's modern day, we would say, Armenia, or the Armenian people, who are the descendants of Lavan. And we speak about this in a different Yud. And this Lavan, he's an interesting character, remember. He's the father of Rachel and Leah, and also Bilhah and Zilpah from a different wife. And Yaakov Avinu works by him for 20 years. In the 21st year, Hashem comes to him in a prophecy and tells him, Shuv el eretz avodecha u'motecha ve'eryeh imach. Go back to your land, and I'm going to be with you. So he escapes and he leaves. Lavan doesn't know automatically that he escaped, for an interesting reason, because Yaakov Avinu did not live next to Lavan. Even though he worked for him, he built his own home out in the fields where he raised his family. He didn't want his family to have anything to do with Lavan. Oy la rasha va'oy le'shcheno. Yaakov knew this, and Yaakov built his camp outside, away from Lavan. Later on, we see Vayogad le'Lavan bayom hashlishi ki barach Yaakov. It was only after 3 full days that Lavan even gets word that Yaakov disappeared. And interesting, it says, Vayogad le'Lavan bayom hashlishi ki barach Yaakov. Who told Lavan? There were no phones. There was no much way to identify how someone had left so quickly. And he was not around in the area. If you look at the Baal HaTurim, Rabbeinu Yaakov Baal HaTurim, the author of the Tur, the father of the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, and he tells us that this was Amalek that told them, that had identified. Who was this Amalek? Amalek is the son of Eliphaz, who's the son of Esav. And interesting, the Baal HaTurim tells us, the Baal HaTurim is always known for those gimatriyot. He tells us, if you take the word ki barach, it equals in gimatria Amalek. And if you look later on, in Shemot Yud Daled Hey, it tells us in the pasuk, Vayugad lemelech Mitzrayim ki barach ha'am. Later on, when Bnei Israel left Mitzrayim, someone else also told Paro ki barach ha'am. And who was that? If you look at the Mechilta and Beshalach, it says Amalek higidlo. It was Amalek that told Paro, because initially, when we look at the Pesukim of the Mefarshim, Moshe just really asked to go out for 3 days to do korbanot. And Paro first initially told him go with just the men. He says no, bina'areno, biskaneno, and he tells them no, we go with the old, the young, the children, the wives. We go with everybody when we go for our holidays. We don't just go with the men, to observe. And so it was only after 3 days that someone tells Paro, listen, they left and they're not coming back. They're on their way to Eretz Israel and they're not returning. And Paro gets worked up and he decides to go and run after them. And this was Amalek who told them. And Amalek, interestingly enough, the Mefarshim and the Midrash tells us that he lived over 300 years. He was an old man, this Amalek. And he was so old that he saw when Yaakov Avinu was living in Lavan's house, when Yaakov was living in Eretz Canaan, when he went down with the 70 to Mitzrayim, he saw them for 210 years as slaves, and he saw them also leaving Mitzrayim. And he put together an army to fight them, to kill them. This Amalek, he was a hardcore hater of the Jews, and he went after them in every way. And he went to Paro and said, listen, Paro, they're not coming back. They're going, and then Paro got all worked up and went to fight after them. And the Bicurim tells us that the only time that you'll see in the Torah Ki Barach is in these two locations, because Ki Barach is Gimatria Amalek, and to tell us it was because of him that we ended up having these two problems, one with Lavan, and later on with Paro. Rabbi Abraham Azulai, the author of Hesed L'Abraham, the grandfather of the Hida, he tells us that Lavan was planning to kill Yaakov, and if he would have been unsuccessful in killing him, he would have at least attempted to make him a Baal Boom, and to cripple him in some way that he would not be able to be buried in Merat HaMachpelah with our forefathers. And we have to ask a question: why was Amalek so interested to go after Bnei Israel in all these cases? Because he didn't want us to go back into the land, and he knew that if we're going to go back into the land of Eretz Israel, we're going to end up doing the mitzvot, we're going to end up having more achdut amongst our nation, and we're going to end up getting closer to the Borei Olam, and he wanted to do everything in his power to prevent this. And you know, this Amalek, it exists today also. You know, if you ask most people today, why don't they live in Israel? They might say because of money. They might say, I'm not sure, I don't know if it's the right thing. And it's not coincidence that the word Amalek is also gematria of the word safek. It's that people have a safek. Should we go? No, I don't know if we should go. You know, I wonder if we would ask any of the rabbis that lived from 300, 400, 500 years ago, from the time of the Spanish Inquisition, if we asked the Gaon of Vilna, if we asked the Baal Shem Tov, if we asked all the greatest rabbis that lived in our generation, hey, all you need is a flight, and you'll be in Israel in 10 hours or 12 hours from New York or from Miami. They would be like, and what are you doing here? Why are you living in this country then? And we would have a lot of reasons, because of this, because it's the government, that they're not pro the religion, or they're not supportive of the Torah and things like that. And I often tell people, I mean, you should read the Navi. You know, it's a shame that many of the high schools, they don't teach any of the Nevi'im and Keduvim, but if you look at the times of Nevi'im, things were pretty bad. You know, aside, you know, the first few kings that lived with Malchut Bet David, pretty much the remaining kings, with just a few exceptions, were of the Avodah Zarah, and they were not so supportive of many of the ethics of the Torah. And that wasn't a reason to leave. Eretz Israel is our land. It's the only land, and it's the land that we're going to leave and go to, whether we like it or not. We can go betupim ubimcholot with our freedom today, or has v'shalom at a time of running. You know, during the time of the Holocaust, how many of the Jews would have wished that they could have gone to Eretz Israel, that we had our own country. And Baruch Hashem, Hashem returned it back to us. And we have to really take a step and making sure never ever to talk bad, even if we're going to live in Galut, and even if we're going to be here. Our hearts have to be there. We have to be supportive of the land, and we have to really put all of our efforts to support the Jews that are living there. If you look in the Sefer HaChinuch, in mitzvah number Taf Resh Daled, interesting, that's Tered, of Limchot Zar'o min ha'olam, of Amalek, Shnistavinu Limchot Zar'o shel Amalek ul'abed zichro min ha'olam, that we have a commandment to really erase all the descendants of Amalek, and to really remove his remembrance of the world. Zachar unkeva, male and female, gadol v'katan, old and young. V'al zeh ne'emar, timche et zecher Amalek. Which interesting, it says here in Sefer Chinuch, he adds this little tidbit. It's a very, very short part that he adds. Shebichal zecher hu hakol. He tells you that it's all the descendants of Amalek, in all types of forms. And there was a big Gadol Hador who made a tremendous mistake. Who was that? That was Yoav ben Tzeruya, the Tsar Sevav, Shaul HaMelech. He left over the females at the time. His rabbi didn't really explain to him this part. It says, Timche Zecher Amalek, the remembrance, and it seems that he assumed that the Zecher to be Zachar, and he eliminated all the males, and he left the females. And that's like it says, in page 21 in Baba Batra, that this was a tremendous mistake. Shaul HaMelech lost the Malchut because of this type of action. Later on, he ends up bringing Agag. Also, we made another mistake with Agag, and then he brings all the Tzon and the Navi at the time. Tells him, Shemuel, Umeh kol hatzon. And the Hachamim tell us, you have to read Meh, Umeh. He was making fun of Shaul. He says, what's all this Meh that I hear in the background? You brought all the sheep. I told you to get rid of it all. Obviously today, it's not talking ever, has v'shalom, of trying to identify a person of Amalek and ever in any type of violent action. That's not what it's talking about. This Amalek today is an Amalek that's internally, it's within us, partially in the Safek, like we said earlier, of being Gematria of Amalek. You know, a lot of times people are unsuccessful because of doubt. Not because they don't try, because they doubt themselves along the way. And it's not coincidence that if you take the word dolar, which is really the avodah zarah of today, and of course we value money, we need money, and money is the core of so many of the things that the world needs in order to succeed, to trade. We have to be careful. There's a line. Anything that's taken too far can be very easily misguide a person. And that's why dolar is gematria Amalek. And like the Sefer HaChinuch told us, there was a confusion. Timche et zecher Amalek, the zecher and zachar. And it's interesting that even here today, there's a confusion of what the zachar is. They're forgetting what the zecher was. That in the past it was very clear. The zecher was very clear. Biological. It was very, very simple. Today they want to eliminate even that part. And this all started from years ago. How the ideology of Sodom and Amorah has been brought to many of the Western countries. And it's a shame, but we're all going to go to Eretz Israel. And Bezrat Hashem, we'll see in our time the Geulah. And this is why there's a connection between Amalek and the Bicurim. Because the Bicurim today are our children. How do I know the Bicurim are the children? Because when someone has a firstborn child at a natural birth, he brings the son to the Kohen like a Bicurim. And he tells the Kohen, this is yours. This is a male firstborn, this is yours. But I'll trade it for some silver coins and we'll take it back. Just like the Bicurim. Because today we don't have the ability to bring the Bicurim anymore into the Beit HaMikdash, at least not yet. But this is a remembrance that our Bicurim today are our children. And we have to be careful to teach them, to identify according to the Torah, according to the way we have followed the biblical traditions for thousands of years of what is our teaching and what the Torah wants from us. And if we follow that, we'll be successful.